Welcome to the workshop of the Designing the Climate Assembly of Estonia. Now it's Scotland, even Spain, hopefully also Latvia and Lithuania. So we planned it first as only for Estonia, for the initiating group of the possible climate assembly in Estonia. And we planned it as a 2-day workshop in Tallinn. But thanks to the COVID and everything, we are having a international and 3.5 hours e-workshop instead. So things happen, but they're good for something. So let's see for what later on. So I'm Taylor Beck. I'm the kind of co-initiator of Climate Assembly of Estonia that we're hoping to design and kick off. And I'm really, really glad to have this workshop together with 3 fantastic. First, there's Dimitri Lemaire. You can bow. Who will be the facilitator of today's workshop. And Dimitri is an entrepreneur and co-founder of PARTICITIZ, which is the European citizenship and what was it called? Sorry. Association for Participation and Citizenship. Then we have Graham Smith. Again, find him on your screen. He's professor of politics at the Westminster University, the chair of the Foundation for Democracy and Sustainable Development, and he is also active in the Extinction Rebellion of UK. Third, we have Marcin, Polish climate activist, climate assemblies facilitator and designer, and kicking off several climate assemblies in Polish cities and on the state level, but in other places as well. And Marcin has written a fabulous book on citizen assemblies. Most of you, I think, got the link, but we can share the materials later on as well. So what unites us four is the OECD network of innovative citizen participation. We met a couple of months ago in Manchester. This feels like a century ago, actually, already. And I kind of modestly said that, yes, we are planning to design a climate assembly habit, and Marcin and Dimitri, they were like, yeah, we'll come to Tallinn and we'll help you out. And then Graham joined later on. We've been planning this workshop for 2 months now, and I'm so excited and happy that we're here and starting it off. And as a last sentence, the workshop is commissioned by the Estonian Fund for Nature. Thank you. Over to you, Dimitri.
Hello, Estonia then. Hello to everyone, and I'm very happy to be facilitating this workshop today. I know that people from Latvia, Lithuania and Scotland are there too, and I have seen that the Spanish have jumped in last minute. I'm very happy to see them. We also have the OECD people from France, as Tila said. They were the people that actually made us meet. So we did meet for the first time in Manchester. And what Tila doesn't say is that this first idea came up after a few beers at the end of the OECD meeting. And Marcin and I just said, yes, let's go to Tallinn and let's do this. Anyway, so that was a long time before, you know, and that was normal times before Corona. Now we are here through Zoom. And as Tila said, we've been preparing it, and I'm sure it will still work fine, and it will have some advantages actually to you. The program for today is an introduction from Graham Smith that was already presented by Tila. He's going to give us some inspirational words in order to get going this workshop and try to see what we want to do and get a good feeling about what has been done and what can be done. Then we'll go on the mandate, and the mandate is why and for what we're doing that. There, Marcin and Graham will also give some content before going to the choosing the topic, which topic. So climate is a vast topic, subject. So which which precise topic do we want to tackle with this next assembly. Before having a break, we will give you a 15-minute break for you to relax, do your push-ups, or whatever you need to do in 15 minutes, grab a cup of tea. After that, we will go through the recruitment procedure. So who do we want on board in this climate assembly, and how to get them on board, before ending with the power or the impact of such an assembly. What power does it have? How can it change Estonia's climate policy, and what impact can it have? That will bring us to 1:30 Central European Time, 2:30 for you. And then, as I said, we will go into a process which will really enable you to identify the questions you want to ask our experts. Okay, so that's the program for today. Once again, welcome to you all. And I'll give the floor now to Graham for his inspirational words. The floor's yours, Graham.
No pressure then. I'm just going to share my screen with you. I just want to say it's a real pleasure to be here, and it would be more of a pleasure to be with you in Estonia, but it's a pleasure to be with you virtually. So
I just wanted to add one thing. If you do have some questions, please put them in the chat. I'll try to take a couple of questions right at the end of this inspirational words. I can't guarantee I can ask all the questions, but I'll do my best.
I worry slightly about the inspirational words, but we'll be fine. So I've been asked to talk a bit about citizens' assemblies, the background of citizens' assemblies and climate assemblies in particular. And I'm going to refer to 3 assemblies which have actually dealt with climate change: the Irish Citizens' Assembly, the Climate Assembly in the UK, and the Convention for Citizens, the Citizens' Convention for Climate in France. So why this interest in citizens' assemblies at the moment? Well, it seems like there's a bunch of issues, a bunch of really significant issues, which citizens' assemblies appear particularly well designed to deal with. And these seem to be issues which are ones where parties are finding it difficult to decide, that there's a deadlock. We find there are divisions within society about how we should move forward. There are issues where there's a high degree of complexity and there are clear trade-offs between options, and where these are very often long-term issues in which are actually not dealt with very well by our current parliamentary systems, which too often are focused on short-term electoral considerations. And one of the things we can say about climate assemblies and other deliberative processes is they deal very well with these sorts of issues. And it is this sort of issue that the climate crisis is encapsulating. It is one where there are political parties are deadlocked on where we should go forward, where different parts of society would be affected in different ways, and where our systems seem not able to deal with these long-term challenges. Citizens' assemblies are part of a broader movement of politics, which are often referred to as deliberative democracy. And this is seen by its advocates as a different way of doing democratic politics, one which aims to create inclusive ways of doing things, inclusive processes, where, I'm really sorry, someone's got their microphone on. Can someone, I'm sorry about that. One of the downsides of electronic communication. So as I was saying, sorry, that deliberative democracy is a different way of doing democratic politics, one which aims for inclusive decision making based on reason giving, mutual respect and mutual understanding. The aim here is to really try and create a process through which we get informed and reflective public judgment. And we can see that as being very different from the types of party politics and interest group politics that tend to dominate contemporary democracies. But the real challenge for us is this sounds like a great way of doing politics, but how do we create the kinds of spaces where this can happen? And citizens' assemblies are one of the answers to that. They're not the only answer, but they're one of the answers. And what makes citizens' assemblies particularly unusual as a political space is their combination of random selection and deliberation. So typically, and we're going to go through this in much more detail in this workshop, but typically this will be a group of around 100 citizens who will be randomly selected from the broader population using some form of civic lottery or random phone generated group, who will be stratified to make them look like the broader population. So they have the diversity of the broader population. There is no other institution in a democracy that is as diverse as a citizens' assembly. And typically will stratify according to characteristics such as gender, age, geography, ethnicity, and the like. These citizens then come together and they go through a process of learning, deliberation, and decision-making. And sometimes they'll also they'll have a process of consultation with the broader public as well. What's really critical to these processes is that they are facilitated. They're facilitated because if you're bringing 50, 100, however many citizens together who don't know each other, it would be the confident who would dominate. But actually, we create a space where all citizens are equal in terms of their capacity and ability to contribute. These citizens are provided with evidence from witnesses, and these witnesses vary. They will be specialists in the particular topic. They may be advocates of particular policies, or they may be people with particular lived experience, which is useful for participants to know. And then after a process of deliberation, citizens generate recommendations. So just to give you a brief history of citizens' assemblies, most people know about citizens' assemblies because of Ireland. So in 2018, the Irish Citizens' Assembly made a recommendation to change the conservative abortion, constitutional status of abortion in Ireland. And that went to a referendum and was highly successful. And that in many ways popularized the idea of citizens' assemblies. But it had actually been used before that, at least a decade earlier, to look at issues of electoral reform in British Columbia, in Ontario, and in the Netherlands. And since then, they've also been used in the United Kingdom on issues like social care. In Scotland, they're looking at constitutional futures. There's the Climate Assembly, which I'll talk about some more. And there's been numerous local citizens' assemblies as well. I've mentioned in France, the convention that's running at the moment. In Poland, they've been used at the municipal level, and Marcin will be talking much more about those soon. In Poland, what's been really interesting is that they've been empowered, which means that if the mayors have agreed that if recommendations have 80% support within the assembly, they will be implemented. And probably the most interesting development recently is in Belgium, where they've established a process of having citizens' assemblies on a regular basis, which are decided on, the topics of which are decided on by citizens themselves. And we can talk some more about these in the questions if you're interested. I just want to say that although that doesn't sound like that many citizens' assemblies from which to draw evidence, there's actually a longer history of deliberative processes that use random selection. It goes back to the 1970s with citizens' juries in the United States, planning cells in Germany, which typically involved somewhere between 12 and 25 citizens. And then we saw consensus conferences in Denmark in the 1980s and 1990s dealing with really highly controversial scientific issues like the future of transgenic animal policy, those sorts of really, really difficult scientific challenges. And we've seen larger processes like deliberative polls, which Jim Fishkin runs over weekends. You need to run those all over the world. So there are actually hundreds of these processes that are in the same family of citizens' assemblies. So it allows us to not just look at the few citizens' assemblies that have been run at national level, but also to look more broadly about what's going on around the world, and particularly in Canada and Australia at the moment. They're doing a lot of these sorts of processes. And what sort of lessons can we learn? I think the first thing to say is that random selection really has proved itself as a method of bringing together a diverse population, using things like civic lottery to actually to invite a large section of the population and then selecting a body from that group has proved a way of actually generating a broadly representative group of citizens, which really is as diverse as any institution that any of us could imagine. Within this process, because it's done randomly, no social group is ever systematically excluded. And what it does mean is that those people who are usually wield economic and social power are not in the driving seat anymore. We're actually creating this body which is of citizens who very often and mostly have never really engaged politically before in their lives. What we also know is that the formal invitation to participate leads to significant buy-in by citizens. We know that there's plenty of evidence to show that those citizens who start the process, who don't feel very confident necessarily about their capacity to deal with these issues, really emerge as a body as a group who can really make incredibly powerful political decisions. And citizens stick with the process. For example, the process in Canada, in British Columbia, ran for over a year, was 12 weekends, and over the whole process, only one citizen dropped out. This was a real commitment for citizens. They really recognize that they're being asked to do something politically significant. We know from research that facilitated deliberation means that the most confident don't dominate, that actually there is a real equality of voice and equality of contributions within these processes. We know from the range of assemblies that we've seen that citizens are actually willing and able to deliberate on highly controversial, highly conflictual, and highly complex issues and come up with really sound recommendations. And those recommendations have often managed to break political deadlock, which has really infused the political system. So what I want to just move to now is a more specific, just a brief description of the kinds of citizens' assemblies we've seen around climate change. And I already mentioned we've seen at national level, and since Estonia is looking at doing a national assembly, I thought I'd look at the national level ones. And this is in Ireland, in the UK, and in France. The Irish Citizens' Assembly is actually most well known for its, as I've already mentioned, its work on abortion and on other issues. But actually for 2 weeks, it did focus on climate change. And it was commissioned by the Parliament with the question, how can the state... Oh, sorry, I've just got lost with it. How can the state make Ireland a leader in tackling climate change? So the citizens were given 2 weekends out of their 12 weekends to focus on this particular question. And they came up with a series of recommendations, which then went to a special committee of the Parliament. And then its recommendations then went to government. So what we need to remember from this process, and I'll come back to this in a minute, is that it was only 2 weeks and they were given this incredibly broad question to answer. In France, the French Convention has been commissioned by Macron, and Macron's question is how to reduce greenhouse gases by at least 40% by 2030 in a spirit of social justice. So very clearly being primed here that they must take social justice into account. Here we find 150 members working over 7 weekends. So real scaling up of the ambition here in terms of trying to deal with climate change. And also recognizing that since climate change is such a complex issue, they've been divided into 5 themed groups which look at different aspects of climate change and then come back together again. The aim of the French Assembly is to draft laws, to draft regulations, and to draft potential referendums. Unfortunately, the last weekend of the Assembly has had to be postponed because it was supposed to be a couple of weekends ago, or last weekend, I'm not sure, but because of COVID, they've actually had to put it on hold. They've had a special meeting online, which we might want to talk about, to think about what the COVID-19 outbreak means for the climate crisis. But that's been an extra piece of work that they've been doing. And then in the UK, we've seen the UK Climate Assembly established by 6 parliamentary committees. I think this is important for our later discussions. You notice in France, it was commissioned by the president. Here, this has been commissioned by 6 parliamentary committees. And their task has been to think about how the UK can reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. In the UK, we're actually mandated by law to get to that net zero by 2050. The Assembly has 110 members and has been working over 4 weekends. And similar to the French model, it decided to break into 3 themed groups in order to deal with the complex topic and the vast topic that is climate change. and its recommendations will be going to committees. Now, unlike the French Assembly, like the French Assembly, the UK Assembly has been affected by COVID-19. It was supposed to meet in person last weekend, and what they've decided to do is hold their last weekend virtually. And they're doing that over a series of shorter meetings over the next 3 or 4 weekends when they will come to their recommendations. So what I'd like to sort of leave you with some thoughts which we're going to be taking on through this workshop is some of the design challenges that these citizens' assemblies face, particularly those on climate change. The first, I think, is, first I know is mandate, is getting the mandate right, is a clarity of task. I think one of the problems that the Irish Assembly faced was actually they were given a fairly vague, a relatively vague question about making Ireland a climate leader. No sort of sense of reducing emissions by a particular point of time at all, unlike the UK and the French Assembly. So I think the first thing we can learn here is that we really need to think carefully about what the task should be. The second thing we need to take care on is recruitment. And it's interesting that the 3 assemblies that I've mentioned all use different recruitment processes. The UK Assembly used the civic lottery, which is where you send out masses of letters to thousands of households inviting them if they'd be interested in participating. That's the most common way of doing a citizens' assembly. In France, they used a random phone generator in order to generate a body of citizens. And in Ireland, they used door-to-door knocking. There are pros and cons with them. I think there are reasons why we think a civic lottery is probably the most effective, but we can talk about that as this meeting continues. The second issue around recruitment is stratification, and there are debates about which criteria we should use. We've seen some interesting innovation or some developments in France, where they've made sure that they've included unemployed people, they've included people who are homeless within the process. They've been as inclusive, as radically inclusive as they feel they could be in terms of trying to bring the most socially excluded people into the assembly. In the UK, they added a question which was about attitudes towards climate change. How concerned are you about climate change? Their worry was that they didn't just want to have people who were worried about climate change. They wanted to include people within the assembly who didn't see climate change as being that important. So there's all sorts of interesting questions about how do we decide which stratification criteria to use. And the final thing on recruitment is an honorarium. And it's interesting that in France and UK, they've been using an honorarium, whereas in Ireland, they didn't. And in Ireland, they did have some problems keeping people in the assembly. Still, the majority of people did attend, but I think an honorarium, it's also really important to honour people in terms of the civic work that they're doing. In terms of governance, there are some differences between the 3 assemblies in relation to their independence and oversight and advice. All of them have ensured that they've had advisory committees made up of people who are specialists in deliberative democracy, but also in the areas that are being covered, and in making sure they've got different interest groups involved in that governance process. In France, I think one of the interesting things they've got is they've got 3 high-profile guarantors who are well-known public figures, who are public advocates and providing oversight to the process. And finally, in terms of size, length and structure, there's a real issue here about dealing with the complexity of the issue and how can you deal with something as complex as climate change. And I think in Ireland, giving it only 2 weekends was not enough time to really deal with this in enough depth. And it's interesting that both in France and in the UK, they divided into themed groups like consumption, like energy in the home, those sorts of things, to look in things in more detail, specific issues, and then coming back together. You might ask why the UK thought it could do it in 4 weeks, whereas the French have got 7 weeks. That's a matter of budget. The budget in the UK was much less than the budget provided in France. And finally, in terms of impact, it's quite difficult with the climate assemblies to actually know what kind of impact they're going to have, because 2 of them haven't really haven't made their recommendations yet. I think it's the most interesting one, arguably, is the French one, because they are making their recommendations direct to the president. They're also making their recommendations in the form of draft laws and in draft regulations and draft referendums. And they've got legal scholars, legal professionals helping them in the Assembly to actually write those laws and write those regulations. That is a real innovation. So the final comment I want to make before I leave you is that it is clear that with a good mandate, with a clear mandate, with adequate time, and importantly, and this is what this workshop is about, careful design, ordinary people are willing and able to make incredibly difficult decisions on issues as complex and controversial as the climate crisis. We are in a situation where our governments and our parliaments have not dealt effectively with the climate crisis, and citizens' assemblies are one way, and probably one of the better ways that we can actually bring forward the kinds of difficult decisions that we need to bring forward in order to deal with the climate crisis. So thank you for spending the time with me, and good luck with the rest of your discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graham, and you are 15 seconds early, so thank you for respecting the time. Marcin, I'd like to give you the floor. Would you like to jump in, maybe comment or give some more content about this?
I would like to add on to what Graham has just said. So I have also prepared a presentation. It must look nice. Okay, let me just start it. And where is it? Okay. And now I'm going back to Zoom and I'm sharing my screen. There you go. All right. So for me, it actually, Tela mentioned my environmental background. I currently, I'm more involved into democracy innovations than the climate change issues. So I'm focused on actually the designing of the process. And for me, why did I get into this from the field of sustainability actually? Because I realized that exactly it is the way decisions are made is the key for promoting those solutions for sustainability. I realized that the technical aspects for, let's say, renewable energy are mostly done. So we have the technologies, but the question is, how do you make the decisions in order for the society to actually to use it, to apply it, to implement it in practice? The experience from Poland is that majority of people, when you organize a poll in Poland, they will tell you that they're for renewable energy, and that they would like to, they agree for shutting down coal mines, but it is not reflected in the way the decisions in the parliament are made. There is this discord between the parliament and what actually people say. So for me, democracy is about making well thought out decisions that are made for the common good, and actually citizens' assemblies work very well for this aim. And the question is also why? How does it happen? So there are several reasons. First of all, the group is independent. Since everyone is selected at random, those people don't have this, the word, it may not sound nice, like a leash from their party leaders. So they are independent in terms of they can make their own decisions and no one will throw them out. They don't need to think about the issues such as re-election. The independence is provided through random selection. It's one of the key reasons for why citizens' assemblies work. The second one is inclusion of those very diverse perspectives. And it's not just in terms of the participants themselves, but it's also about the stakeholders and experts. In the model that we use, experts present a variety of opinions of possible solutions. So, and definitely the learning phase is crucial so that people who make those final decisions will be able to really understand what is it all about, what are the advantages, disadvantages of particular options before they make a final decision. And in our model, all stakeholders, it may be non-governmental organizations, it may be institutions, it may be companies. Everyone is invited on equal grounds. It means the amount of time people receive, and also the order of presentations is randomly selected. So there is this equal playing field for everyone. They don't need to compete between each other in terms of who has got more money and so on. It just doesn't work like this. So, and the reason for people to meet and to come up for those solutions, for those final recommendations, is to discover what is the common good, what is the best thing for us. And this collective voice is created again through this randomly selected group with the demographic criteria. So, and since they are favorable conditions for deliberation, this means facilitated discussion. People can really speak what they think, they can be honest, and the atmosphere in the room is very good. That's why the whole process works. So the fundamental design principles, for me, this is like in Poland, we use a list of standards for the citizens' assembly, and I will talk about them later. But there are some, like a background design principles that are connected to those standards. And the first one is that democracy is for everyone. The second one is about the fairness of the process. It should be fair. And it's the power of the people. So it means that it is the citizens' assembly is like since it is a microcosm of a whole population, then it means that people are can be given the power to make the final recommendations or decisions at the end.